If you ask me what office women may fill, I will reply, any. I do not care what case you put. Let them be sea captains if you will. We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path laid open to women as freely as to man. Can we wonder that many reformers think that measures are not likely to be taken in behalf of women unless their wishes could be publicly represented by women? Margaret Fuller was a transcendentalist thinker of the 19th century. She focused on equality of all people. She was one of the first Americans to stand up for women. She explored the new idea of feminism through her writing and conversations. As America was continuing to form, she was writing and thinking about the world she wanted it to become. What role would women have in this world? Would they be able to transcend the prior social stigmas? Margaret Fuller's accomplishments include being the first American to write a book about equality for women, becoming the first editor of The Dial, a transcendentalist journal, making her the first woman in America to edit an intellectual publication, and being the first woman to enter Harvard College Library to pursue research. She truly took advantage of the many opportunities America offered. She did not allow anyone to stop her and inspired many women to do the same. Margaret Fuller was born on May 23, 1810 in Cambridgeport, Massachusetts. Her father was her primary teacher, and he was very harsh. But because of her father, she received an extensive education, despite the fact that women did not have many opportunities to go to school. In 1831, Fuller attended a conversation for women. This experience enlightened her and led her to discover her purpose of becoming an intellectual with a mission. After that conversation experience, Fuller began to take her education and writing more seriously. She began publishing literary criticisms in James Freeman Clarke's Western Messenger and in the New England Galaxy. Her father encouraged her to write and edit many articles and books. Unfortunately, her father died in 1835. Fuller then moved into the city near many of her transcendentalist friends. After moving, Fuller continued to develop relationships with people associated with the Transcendentalist movement and was accepted into their inner circle. Those people who became her friends included Ralph Waldo Emerson, Elizabeth Peabody, and William Ellery. In 1840, she became the editor of The Dial, a Transcendentalist magazine. The magazine also published some of her work. Along with editing The Dial, Fuller organized what were called conversations for women, which were similar to salons conducted by feminist women in France. Fuller's purpose in conducting these conversations was to enrich the lives of women and cause them to think. These conversations began to gain more popularity, which spread Fuller's name around, and as the popularity continued to grow, the conversations increasingly involved political subjects such as gender roles, suffrage, women's rights, and abolition. Male and female represent the two sides of the great radical dualism, but in fact, they are perpetually passing into one another. Fluid hardens to solid, solid rushes to fluid. There is no wholly masculine man, no purely feminine woman. Fuller was an instigator of the feminist movement in America, but it took a while for others to catch on. She was exploring this new idea that maybe women were not that different from men. However, Margaret Fuller did not only write about women's rights. She strove to write about all kinds of injustice. She traveled with Sarah and James Freeman Clarke and their mother, Rebecca, to Illinois and Wisconsin to experience the American wilderness. On this trip, she encountered another type of injustice. This injustice was the life of the American Indian. She wrote a book about her experience called Summer on the Lakes in 1843. She wrote about the women and beliefs of the native peoples, but really she was digging deeper, beyond the issue, as any transcendentalist would. Summer on the Lakes in 1843 occupies a pivotal position in Margaret Fuller's development as a writer, a transcendentalist, and a feminist. This portfolio of sketches, poems, stories, anecdotes, dialogues, reflections, and accounts of a leisurely journey to the Great Lakes is at once an external and an internal travelogue. Drawing on historical sources, contemporary travel books, and her own first-hand experience of life in the prairie land, Fuller uses the opportunity of visiting the frontier to meditate on the state of her own life and of life in America, both as they were and as she hoped they might become. Unfortunately, she was not taken as seriously as her counterparts. She was way ahead of her time. She took the issue of gender inequality and racial inequality and thought about them in a different way. She dove deeper into those issues and disregarded what society said. She did not care about how it had been. She thought of how it should be. She was a strong woman who was willing to stand up for the oppressed, even when the rest of the world was not. Her strength was evident to the people she knew. Nathaniel Hawthorne is said to have used Fuller as an inspiration for Zenobia, a strong female character in Blithedale Romance. Fuller had an unceasing spirit. She was not like other women and did not act as women were supposed to. She was ambitious, outspoken, and intellectual. Margaret Fuller called for one creative energy, one incessant revelation that would transcend all divisions of race, class, and gender. Works such as The Great Lawsuit and Women in the 19th Century and Fuller's Conversations may have inspired the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. The Seneca Falls Convention was the first women's rights convention in America. Fuller believed that women needed to live freely as equals to men. This became the major premise of the Declaration of Sentiments, which was composed and read aloud at the Seneca Falls Convention. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. While alive, Fuller influenced Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who organized the Seneca Falls Convention. Susan B. Anthony was also quite possibly influenced by Margaret Fuller. But other than influencing a few women, Margaret Fuller was not taken very seriously while she was alive. Her writing did not sell well. It was also radical and hard to read. Fuller's writing was like that of Mary Wollstonecraft, who may be credited with inspiring Fuller. Fuller died in 1850 in a shipwreck off Fire Island. Her tragic death ended her life as an explorer of ideas, but her influence lives on. Her ideas inspired movements of whole gender and racial groups. Though her ideas did not catch on while she was alive, her deep exploration inspired others later, and our lives would not be the same without her.